Yes.
Great, perfect. Okay, so conflicts of interest, there are too many. I apologize. Well, I don't really apologize. I do it on purpose. But in terms of things that are relevant to today's talk, uh, I am president of the NEFJC, which is a nonprofit educational community promoting the use of social media for medical education. And I'm also a member of the American Journal of Kidney Disease Social Media Advisory Board. So here's the title of my talk. And so, you know, it's like you can't give a talk in internal medicine without having a picture of Osler. So here is my required picture of Osler. And we so celebrate him for introducing bedside rounds that we forget that he was also the author of the first comprehensive medical textbook of medicine. There had been textbooks of medicine, but there was a very different model for that. They were usually owned by libraries, and multiple physicians would use a single copy of this medical textbook. It was more like an encyclopedia. It was never intended to be owned by a single person. And Osler realized that if we're going to improve scientifically based care, every physician had to have their own textbook. And so he went out and he created this textbook. And this was published, I think, in 1892. And this is probably the last time one person could write a textbook of medicine, just because of the difficulty and just the breadth of medicine. And so Osler, quite the genius, was able to do that. But it kind of by definition, it was going to be limited in terms of what it could cover, because you just didn't have specialists. And people were clamoring for more knowledge. And into that demand came Russell Cecil, who is the author of Cecil's Internal Medicine and was the inventor of the multi-author medical textbook. And he was very clever the way he did that. He had 130 authors contributing chapters, and he got those authors from all over the country. And specifically, every medical school in the country had one author writing his textbook, because what medical school wouldn't require the textbook that was written by their own faculty? And it instantly became a sensation and was the #1 medical textbook pretty much from the moment it was published. But one of the limitations of writing a multi-author textbook was he needed to have a coherent strategy for writing all the chapters. So it sounded like it was all part of one textbook. And so what he did is he had a very a diagnosis-centric design. And this is great if you know your diagnosis. But if you just have a patient coming in with symptoms like a headache, you would have to skip all over the book to figure out what was relevant for your patient, right? So headache could be encephalitis, migraine, brain cancer, cluster headache. These would be in all different sections of the textbook. And this was an opening that Tinsley Harrison saw, and he wanted to hold on, I got to fix one thing real quickly. I've got this message on here. I don't want to pull this down, and I'm going to sorry about that. And so he is the author of Principles of Internal Medicine, or Harrison's Internal Medicine, and this was published in 1950. And he took this organization and flipped it on its head, and he had a regional or symptom-based organization for his textbook, which made the textbook useful if you did not already know the diagnosis. And it was kind of a slow burn. The book was introduced in 1950, and about 14 years later, it finally passed Cecil to become the #1 textbook in internal medicine, and it is still the #1 textbook in internal medicine, and it will always be the #1 textbook of internal medicine. It is the champ. Okay, but we've kind of moved past textbooks, and this was largely due to the work of Burton Rose, who, if you had an opportunity to meet him, would immediately tell you to call him Bud Rose, and then you would try not to laugh that it was Rosebud or Bud Rose. But of course, he's the inventor of Up to Date, which is the current champion. And I used to have a section in this talk where I would justify the fact that I called it the current champion of medical textbooks. I don't feel like I need to do that. If you do question whether it really is a champion, you can come up to me afterwards. I'll be happy to talk to you about it. But just grant it that it is now our current champion. And it looks a little bit different than Muhammad Ali. It is a little bit more nimble. It is a little bit more flexible, but it is the champion. And if you look up why UpToDate overtook Harrison's, and if you were to go, there's a nice video on YouTube of Burton Rose talking about that, and he has a long soliloquy about why textbooks are limited in their length because of page limits, etc. But I don't think this is true. I don't think that the reason that UpToDate overtook Harrison's was that the 4,062 pages of Harrison's is not long enough. I think the reality is that UpToDate was written for the information appliance of the time, and it was natively written, right? Because before that, there were CD-ROMs of textbooks, but if anybody's ever plugged one in and looked at it, it is clear that they are just adapting the old technology, the textbook, for the new technology, and that's not what you want to do. You want to have something that is native to the medium, and that's what UpToDate was. And so we have this nice progression. We have Osler in 1892, and his major innovation was a distribution, right? We were going to put a textbook in everybody's hand. And then there was Cecil, and his innovation was the multi-author textbook, which gives you more depth and more width. Excuse me. Harrison's innovation was one primarily of search, right? We were going to reorganize the textbook to be regionally and symptom-based orientation. And then Rose, he brings it to the computer, but really it is every one of the previous revolutions, right? It is a better distribution because you can update it continuously, hence the name UpToDate. It is way deeper and way more broad than a typical textbook because of no page limitations. And, regional organization is great, but it's not as good as full text search, which the computer certainly offers. So it really wraps all of these innovations together. And you have this neat 100-year span between Osler's introduction in 1892 and UpToDate's introduction, though incomplete, in 1992. And then you can also kind of track that there's kind of been every 30 to 40 years, we've had a kind of passing of the torch in terms of our leading medical media. And it begs the question, it's been 28 years now since Burton Rose's UpToDate has come out, and is there something else? Is it always going to be UpToDate, or is there something in the future? And when I showed UpToDate, I used this computer because I was very deliberate about this. This is a state-of-the-art computer for the year 2000, but the information appliance that we use now looks a lot more like this than it does look with a CD-ROM drive computer. When Steve Jobs reached into his pocket and pulled out the first iPhone, it changed everything, right? This was an estimate that 6 billion people on the planet have a mobile phone, and only 4.5 billion people on the planet have a toilet, right? I showed this slide to my son, and I said, "What do you think about this, Simon?" And he said, "Well, that means 2.5 billion people don't need to worry about dropping their phone in the toilet," which is like, that's good. 16-year-old sons have a role. But it's changed everything, right? It's changed how we look up information on Wikipedia. It changed how we get ourselves around. It changed how we date. It's changed how we feed ourselves. Things that we've been doing for thousands of years, like naming new popes, look completely different now. But in medicine, it's been interesting how small the impact has been, right? We have medical calculators, and those are great, and we've got simple reference materials like drug books, and everybody uses these, and these have been kind of really eliminated these type of reference tools. But if you ask people what the most important thing about a cell phone is, they'll usually tell you, well, I always have a flashlight now, right? Which is probably, underutilizing the supercomputer in our pocket. What do we use them for? So this is a list of the top applications. This is from 2015. I can't find more reliable, more recent data, but I think it hasn't changed much. And if you organize them by whether they are social apps or not, you'll see that the vast majority of the biggest applications are all social. And if you take a look at the largest communities on earth, Facebook monthly users is only exceeded by Christians, right? It is absolutely mammoth. The scale of these things are unprecedented. And so I really think that whatever is going to replace Rose is going to be influenced by these twin revolutions of mobile and social. And that should terrify you, right? Because, you know, you take a look at the social landscape and it doesn't look like something that you can build education on. These are the 3 most followed people on Twitter. Here are the 3 most followed people on Facebook. Or liked people on Facebook. It's a junk food economy, right? And we're going to need to make it a little bit more nutritious if we're going to use it to base our medical education. In other words, how do we go from Kylie Jenner to Edward Jenner? And what I'm proposing is this concept called FOAM, which stands for Free Open Access Medical Education. And what it really represents is when we go from broadcast to YouTube, when we go from terrestrial radio to podcasts, when we go to journals and textbooks to blogging. It is a massive democratization where instead of having a few appointed people at the front of the room, we have many different people contributing to medical education as they see fit and where they can contribute. And we're going to kind of go through the components of FOAM. And this is I like to divide it up into these kind of 6 different components. I'm not going to go through all of them today. But what's interesting is when you then assemble them into various combinations to create what I like to call events. So let's start with blogs and tweets. So they are together because they're related and they're increasingly being blurred. I think of blogging as a little bit more sophisticated, more thoughtful, and tweeting to be more immediate and more conversational. If you talk to Brian Vardabedian, who's a real thought leader in this field, he says there's only 2 things on the internet. He says there's content and then comments about content. And those fit nicely between these division between blogging and tweeting. This is my blog. I've been running this blog since 2008. It's called Precious Bodily Fluids, and I do a lot of stuff. So this is just some of the kind of my typical blog where I'll write editorials or I'll talk about teaching points or personal stories, tutorials, explanations. I've been doing a kick talking about contrast nephropathy a lot, and it's fun because I can follow my own transition and thought on contrast nephropathy because I can just say, hey, this is what I was thinking about contrast nephropathy in 2013, and this is what I was thinking about it in 2016, and this is what I think about it now. And I have this kind of documented documentation about what I was thinking about and what was interesting. I also put all of my lectures on my blog for people to download. And I put them both as PDFs and as the native PowerPoint presentation so other people can then edit them. And then one of the things that I actually don't think these types of lectures are the most effective way for teaching. I like to do interactive roundtable discussions, and usually I'll have a handout for those types of events. And again, I provide those handouts available as both PDF and as native Pages documents for people to then edit. And a lot of this came from this interview I saw with Vince Cerf. Vince Cerf is a major thought leader on internet technology. He was the inventor of one of the fundamental protocols that allows the internet to exist. He says that information sharing is power. That people are more than willing to share information, not because they're being paid, but because they get a feeling of satisfaction that somebody else found their information useful. And this is once I read it, I was like, oh yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And then I started to think, well, if what I'm really trying to optimize for is making what I provide useful for other people, then I should make it maximally useful. And so instead of providing just the PDF of a lecture or just the PDF of a document, I want to provide them the editable content. Microsoft Word and PowerPoint. The idea that, that's first of all, it's a more humble way to say it. It says like, this is the way I teach something, but there may be a mistake in it, or you may want to teach it differently, or you may want to just grab one slide or one image from that. Let me make what I'm providing you maximally useful and maximally flexible so that you can use it more. And that optimizes their value. And as they get more value, I get more satisfaction. So in terms of tweeting, we'll kind of switch over, transition to Twitter, because there's a lot of excitement there. I say it's conversational. I want to give you kind of an example of this kind of conversational aspect. This happened a few years ago. I got this tweet. It says, Kidney Boy. It's from MedCal X, which is a medical calculator. I know most of you probably on Twitter don't get tweeted by medical calculators, but this is my life, okay? And she says, the medical calculator asked me, is the osmolality of D5W 252 or 278? Because this link here says 252, but my calculation says it should be 278. And this is right up my alley. I love this stuff. I said, well, D5W has, D5, 5 stands for 5% per 100 ml, so it's 50 grams per liter. The molecular weight of glucose is 180. So the concentration should be 278 millimoles per liter. But I saw that the link that he posted came from Michelle Lynn, who's a friend of mine on Twitter. And I said, why don't we ask her? So I said, what's the story here? Anybody have an explanation? And then Michelle says, ooh, I didn't do the calculations myself, but I did use this reference. Let me know that I'm wrong, right? Isn't that everything on the internet? I didn't do it. I just copied it from here. And it's actually from a pretty reliable blog. The Academic Life in Emergency Medicine is an excellent source. And they had this table right here where the osmolality of D5W is 252. And then Brian Lee, who's a nephrologist in Honolulu, living in Detroit in December, makes me always kind of pause when I think that there are nephrologists in Honolulu, right? How did I end up here in Detroit? But Brian's goes, unconfirmed Googling shows that dextrose monohydrate is used, which contains 7 to 9% water. So you need to adjust for that. So first of all, unconfirmed Googling, awesome term. But that's interesting because the spread between our two answers was about 9%. And Michelle Lynn totally excited that she may not have made a mistake. That would make the molecular weight 198, which would explain the 252 osmolality. And then as usual, pharmacy comes in to say, yep, that's correct. D5W is dextrose monohydrate, molecular weight 198 gives an osmolality of 252. This was something that was totally new to me. I didn't quite understand. I didn't understand it before. I'd been teaching this wrong for a long time before. And so what I then did is I wrote the whole story up in a blog post, right? Because one of the things about Twitter is it's super ephemeral. And so this was a really interesting teaching point that spilled out over Twitter over about 6 hours. But if you've been seeing patients during those 6 hours, you would have missed that educational tidbit. And there's almost no indexing of Twitter. But if once you put it in a blog post, it's something that you can look up. It's something that's getting indexed by Google. And so, but you're not done yet, because once you write the blog post, then you need to post it to Twitter, which is what I did. And then David Chen, who's a urologist in Pittsburgh, goes, that's a great story. It's not what we know or don't know. It's what we don't know that we don't know, which is a little Rumsfeldian, but it does get to the point. And I think it does represent another important point, is that this whole thing comes out of the fact that I was wrong, right? I thought it was 278 because I did the math. I didn't realize it was dextrose monohydrate. And you're going to be wrong all the time. Not all the time, hopefully not all the time. But when you are wrong on the internet, it's just best to own up to it, admit that you're wrong, correct it, move on, and not to get defensive. And so this is kind of a geographic map of the participants in this discussion. And like I said, it spilled out over 6 hours from the initial question to the final blog post. It ends up being, I think it was a real kind of positive educational moment. So here's the initial question. Here's the blog post in the middle. Here's the final tweet about the story. And you get this kind of reinforcement, is that you have blogging and tweeting reinforcing each other and being a component of each other. I thought it was pretty nice. We are also seeing kind of a blend of this, or a reversal of the two roles. So this is in what's known as the tweetorial, which is just a chain of tweets. Probably the master of this medium is a guy named Tony Brew. He's director of resident education at the VA in Boston. and he started creating these these tweetorials, which are a chain of tweets. So this one is 17 long, and there it goes. 17 tweets long, and this one is just by why calcium channel blockers cause peripheral edema. And he includes images from the medical literature. He has links to the primary data and walks through that. And it's a beautiful explanation for it. And one of the nice things is it shows why treating it with diuretics is not effective, and what we should be using is ACE inhibitors for that. And you need to understand the physiology. And he really brings it down there. And what he really leans into is the importance of curiosity. Is that in a world where we have optimized medical students to answer questions on UWorld and get ready for their USMLE, and that's the focus of all of our pre-med education, we have extinguished a lot of creativity, and this is his goal, is to bring that, not creativity, curiosity, and that's his goal, to bring that back into medicine. He has been phenomenally successful. The blue bars are the number of tutorials he's done a month, and the red line is the number of new followers in thousands that he has gained per month. It has resulted in a huge following. He's got 38,000 followers on Twitter. And people sometimes look at these gaudy Twitter accounts and think of them as just kind of a narcissistic measure of popularity. But Tony Brew really says, this is the size of my classroom. What if I'm trying to do is medical education? These are the number of people that I can reach with my medical education. And there's no reason to be to run away from that or be embarrassed by it. And then he also says that it's validation that what he's doing is interesting and is bringing people in. That if he was not doing stuff, if it was just like eating broccoli, he wouldn't get these kind of followers. And so I think this is a healthy way to look at a follower count. He also got the opportunity to write a perspective piece in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's called "Why is a Cow?", which is a great question. I don't know why is a cow, but talking about curiosity tutorials, it's a pretty heartwarming editorial if you get a chance to read it. In nephrology space, probably the leading tweetorialist is Aisha Sheikh, who is division chief of interventional nephrology at Mount Sinai in New York. And I want to point out, she has, at the time that I made this slide, she had 1,800 followers. And these are the number of impressions she's gotten from her first 8 attempts at doing these tutorials. And this is the line, this is the number of followers she has. But look at the impact, look at the number of people that have seen her tutorials, way beyond what her inherent audience is. And this is one of the huge advantages of Twitter over just about any other medium, is just incredible virality. If you have something that is really interesting, people will promote it and amplify it, and you can get to a huge audience, way greater than you would in other mechanisms. And then Tony Brew has teamed up with a group of other people, and they've created medtutorials.com, which is just really, it's a clearinghouse, a place where they store links to all these tutorials so you can look them up by specialty or by topic. And it's a pretty clever use of the technology. But to me, it's so interesting, right? Because I grew up, whatever. I started using Twitter when we used it to promote our blog posts, and now we have a blog that is promoting the tweets, right? We've had this kind of reversal of what's being used for. And I think the reality is it's just a blend, that by chaining these tweets together, you've able to do much longer and much more sophisticated descriptions of what's going on. It's no longer limited to just 280 characters. So that's blogs and tweets. I want to move on to now images. And so if you go on any type of social media, you'll see tons of images. And, and the reason for that is that just they are very engaged and they increase people's engagement on Twitter. So photos are the single number one thing you can do to a tweet to increase engagement. But my favorite one of all of them is just make sure you put any type of number in your tweet, because that'll bump your engagement by 17%. This comes from Twitter's own guidelines. I love that. And so in medicine, the problem is that a lot of our images are Western blots. It's not the most engaging content. And I know all you clinical researchers are laughing at the Western blots, but your Kaplan-Meier curves are really not much better. And so the question comes, how do we convey scientific content in a way that is native to social media? And I think that last part, that's native to social media, is super important, right? I think the lesson is, you know, when they moved Harrison's to a CD-ROM, it in no way competed with up-to-date, right? Because you were just taking the old medium and transforming it to the new medium, and that doesn't work. You really need to have something that's native to it. And the guy that had created the visual abstract is a surgical resident named Andrew Ibrahim, and he was the creative director of the Annals of Surgery. I do not know how many journals have a creative director, but that was his position. And he created this way to convey the chief piece of information from a surgical trial in a single slide. And he broke it down into a bunch of different components. We're now pretty familiar with it. But one of the things that he did was he did a nice crossover design study to kind of measure how effective these are. And of course, he then presented his results in a visual abstract. And the presence of a visual abstract increased impressions of a tweet by 8-fold, increased retweets by 8-fold, and article visits by 3-fold. Now, it's important to understand kind of the level of engagement that you get, right? So the number of people that saw the tweet on average was 23,000, and that translated to 175 people pushing the link. So, you know, Twitter's great, but the engagement is going to be shallow, right? You're going to have a lot more people seeing it than people that want to go visit it. But quite honestly, for me, a lot of these surgical visual abstracts, I liked seeing the information. I kind of like seeing what our surgical colleagues were doing research on and what kind of their bottom line findings were. But I don't think I would ever follow those links to read the article. It just was out of my wheelhouse. But once he started this became widespread. So this was an early visual abstract we did for NEFJC. This is one that was done by the investigators for the Credence trial. The New England Journal of Medicine jumped on, and they started using visual abstracts, very simple ones. And here's a visual abstract from C. Jason, and they were also very quickly adopted this technique. And in fact, in this editorial, Dr. Mehrotra, when he was kind of giving a perspective of the year, says that C.G. Jason was the first nephrology journal to launch visual abstracts, and we plan to continue to lead the way on this initiative, and we intend that a visual abstract will soon accompany every research article published in C. Jason. And what I think is the most useful, and I've talked to my partners who agree with this, is that the email blasts have the visual abstract right in them. And so I'm always clicking on those tiny little pictures to make them bigger, and then it takes me to the website. But whatever, it gets the point across, and I love these things. They've put together a editorial board that creates these visual abstracts, and then Kidney 360 has followed right along with them and has done the same thing. So I am part of this group that creates a lot of these visual abstract creation, and we have a private Slack channel where we vet them and kind of do a peer review of each other's work before we submit them to the journal, making sure we're not submitting mistakes and trying to make them as good as possible. There's a lot of trading of icons to make these as good as possible. And this was some of the early data. I think this was in the first year of doing the visual abstracts, and we kind of looked at the impact of well, do I have a key here? Yeah, there's a key of what we were doing. And what we found was these are the C. Jason tweets, and if they had a visual abstract, they got a lot more engagement than the tweets without visual abstracts. But one of the things that's interesting is that other images actually performed better than the visual abstract. And when I saw this, and actually after even just looking at Ibrahim's initial study, you know, I was kind of left with the question, right? Is it really the visual abstract that grades attention, or is it any image would have the same effect? And so this was the question, and So we designed a study to look at this, right? So Ibrahim had done a double crossover. We said, well, we'll do a triple crossover. We'll compare visual abstract to text only to a key figure, and let's see how kind of impressions we get on Twitter. And this was just published last week, I believe. And what we found was that the visual abstract was much more powerful than citation only, and significantly more powerful than a key figure. And we have a couple of different ways of measuring it. The one place we did not see improvement of visual abstracts over a key figure was in change in alt metrics, which may not have been a good outcome to look at. We only have a 2-week washout between these. It may have not been adequate to see a difference there. But here's the data in a little bit easier way to read this. And you can see dramatic improvement with the visual abstracts all the way on the right compared to key figure and citation only. Here's some other outcomes that were less impressive, looking at, I apologize. Yeah, so so you can see retweets, it's nice improvement with the visual abstract, not a significant difference with clicks, and then the alt metrics, as I mentioned before, not a big difference, better than citation, but no different than key figure. So I want to thank, we did this with the American Journal of Nephrology. And, I remember I presented the idea to Raj. I said, Raj, we should do this triple crossover design. And Raj looked at me and said, I'm already believing visual abstracts. I don't need to see the data. I want to keep doing this. So we had to look elsewhere to find someone to cooperate with this. And Dr. Bakris was helpful there. We really appreciate him allowing us to do this. But you're seeing these visual abstracts spill over, right? You see them show up in big plenary sessions at Kidney Week. You see them today in the lecture that we just had, visual abstracts on smoking showing up here, and in lectures at regional presentations. And then even the style of visual abstracts is spilling over to poster presentations. So this is really becoming quite a phenomenon. Audio, another important component. Podcasts are finding a way to completely envelop medical students in the last bit of non-studying time that they have, like driving and completing chores. We have finally found a way into that time with scientific podcasts. The only thing rising faster than the number of scientific podcasts is the number of inactive scientific podcasts. They are both rising in parallel. Probably the biggest medical podcast, the leading internal medicine podcast, is the Curbsiders. Really remarkable production. They do 1 to 2 podcasts a week, and they're getting 30 to 60,000 downloads for each of those podcasts. And they actually track how people listen to them. And so those numbers are absolutely bonkers. But they still get 75% of people listening to at least half of that podcast, and 50% listening to the whole thing. And I just want to put it in perspective. There's less than 20,000 medical students that graduate every year, and they are reaching 30 to 60,000 with 50% listening to the whole lecture. It really is amazing. If you listen to the podcast, you'll hear the 3 hosts plus 1 expert, but behind the scenes, they have a producer that is doing a lot of the legwork and generating a lot of the information, building the script. They have artists that are doing artwork for it. They have social media editors that are spreading it. They've got an audio editor, and they have fact checkers. So it's a big production, even though it may seem like a little bit of a small. Impact. I've been a guest on the podcast on the Curbsiders about 15 times in the last few years, and I have gotten more feedback from those few visits to the Curbsiders than I've ever gotten anywhere else. I've been blogging for 10, 12 years now. Do a lot of tweeting, have a huge Twitter following, but those there's something about actually talking to people on a podcast that makes a huge difference, and people really come out and talk to you. It's really amazing. Additionally, there are other great podcasts. These 3 podcasts are part of what they call themselves the Pod Squad, and these all have developed pretty sophisticated internal medicine podcasts. You can get CME credit for them. One of the things that's real nice, especially for Core IM, I don't want to is they have show notes where they kind of go through everything about them. This is the podcast that we do for NephJC. Here's the regular host, Jenny Lynn, Samir Farouk, Matt Sparks, and Swapnil Hiremath. And we try our best to get 2 podcasts out a month. It's a little difficult, but we do our best. And it's been moderately successful. This is our first year. You can see our RSS subscriptions, which is kind of a measure of size, give you a sense of how important the curbsiders are in this field. We got mentioned in August on the curbsiders, and we actually had a pretty significant bump in our subscriptions following that. And so it's to me, I can't get over how amazing that curbsider phenomena is. It really spilled over to the work that we do. And then the last kind of component I want to talk about is hashtags, and they kind of seem minor, but I think they're super important. And I first was realized the importance was this experience. So this second year medical student goes, she's in renal week 2, second week of her renal week. She says, I'm still not sure what aldosterone does, but it seems important, right? A very earnest statement. And it's funny when this happens, but it just gets picked up on Twitter, and sometimes you never know what does. And what happened here was a number of aldosterone researchers started talking to her about what they found so amazing about aldosterone, people that had dedicated their life to this. And it was just kind of a heartwarming moment. And it made me start thinking. I was like, well, what do we do? How does a medical student, when they have a renal question, how do they access the wealth of experience on Twitter with Neph Twitter? And so we created Ask Renal. And so it works like this. So you have a random medical student who's got 48 followers, and they can post on Twitter, and they just add the hashtag Ask Renal. And then we have a bot. This was created by Nikhil Shah, and it constantly scans Twitter. And every time it sees the words Ask Renal, it just retweets it. And what's important is that bot has 2,400 followers, and they're all members of the Neph Twitter community, and they further amplify it. And so you get this massive amplification. And so anytime people ask a question, they rapidly get an answer. And so even if they are not part of Neph Twitter, they don't have good followers in that regard, they can access the wealth of information that's available there. Lots of people use it. We reliably get great information from it. We're working on a study right now where we're going through the results and it, kind of measuring how effective it is. But looking at the early results, it's very effective. So it's a great example. It's an example of both amplification and democratization, right? Twitter should not just be useful for people that have amassed a large following in a specific field. We should design it so it's available for everybody. So this is the Twitter participation numbers around Renal Week. These are people that have Kidney Week, Renal Week. Listen how old I am. Kidney Week. And you can just see it's grown from very small, 145 people tweeting in 2011 to 4,000 people tweeting 24,000 times in 2019. That represents about 30% of the people that go to or register for Kidney Week. So it's a remarkable response. Of course, this past year, it's dropped off quite a bit, but not as much as I would have thought with a virtual meeting. So that was kind of interesting. But the reason I bring this up is that you have this great participation in Twitter during the month of November or October, whenever Kidney Week is that year. But the following month, the excitement around the field in nephrology, and this is less true now, but it was certainly true in 2014 and 2015, it really dropped off to crickets. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to see if we could recreate that kind of buzz and excitement around something else, something synthetic, rather than a national meeting. We came up with a couple of solutions sequentially. So the first one was Neph Madness, and this really takes its inspiration from the March Madness. This is the finals from a few years ago. It's my team, the University of Michigan, playing Louisville. This game didn't really exist because Louisville were cheaters, and the game has been banished. But what unites, or what is super exciting about the tournament, are the brackets. And what fans do is they take those brackets and they try to predict all of the winners for them. And they fill out their brackets, and then they compete in office pools and organized betting around the country. And so we said, well, what if we did this for nephrology concepts? And so this is the 2019 brackets. We have 8 regions, and each region has 4 teams for a total of 32 teams. Here's a little easier to read: hypertension, exercise nephrology, hospitalist nephrology, pain, complement, plasma exchange, hepatorenal syndrome, and volume measurement. And then we get experts. We call them our selection committee to help us, once we have the topic, to help us find the teams within that topic. And one of the reasons we bring in these experts is we want people to help us with finding the topics, but we also want to borrow their credibility, right? Because this is one of the big problems with FOAMed is that, I read it on the internet, is just not the most compelling argument that it's true. And so what we want to do is we want to show that it was true. We're borrowing the credibility of our selection experts, and it really is an amazing group of people. And I have been amazed at how often we have asked people to participate, and the people in nephrology, they're good people. Everybody wants to participate. They like doing this. Of course, part of it is we do the heavy lifting for them. We don't ask a lot from them, but it's great that they do this. Part of the gaining that credibility also is we have, since 2018, we've offered CME credit for participating in Neph Madness, and starting in 2019, we started MOC credit. And so this has been another, in the end, it's surprising not many people take part in this, but I think it's like a good housekeeping seal of approval that the data that we have has been vetted and peer reviewed and is accurate. The primary educational payload are these pages that go over the 4 teams in each region. So this is the hospitalist one. We had questions about using hydralazine, PRN hydralazine for blood pressure, using ACE inhibitors perioperatively, and we just kind of go through all the data on this. And we kind of pull out all the stops. We have visual abstracts in that. We have tables. We have links to the primary literature. Try to make this kind of the best review article we possibly could. Now, one of the things that we ran into, like as a blogger, I would copy an image from any article that I wanted without any regard for copyright. But since we do this through the American Journal of Kidney Disease's website, they are a little bit more sensitive to copyright issues. And I will tell you, getting a table or graph from the New England Journal of Medicine is incredibly expensive, and really well beyond the budget that we could do with Neph Madness. So we said, well, what if we just copied the article in watercolors? And so we created this idea of scientific expressionism to glean the major idea of a table, of a graph, without having to pay for it. And so this has been one of the hallmarks of Neph Madness in the beginning. We create our own visual abstracts. One of the other hallmarks or tropes of March Madness is celebrities filling out their brackets and publishing them. And so we wanted to recreate this. And so we had the battle of the journal editors, where we put Raj versus Dr. Feldman, and they did their best guess for Neph Madness 2018. And that was pretty fun. Again, then we also reach out to other people, and we get people to write editorials and opinion pieces of what they think is the best winners. We have a lot of people that come back year after year, and each one of these articles, we call them FOAMed articles, is still freely available on the AJKD website. And that's been real fun. And again, it's one of the ways that we contribute to FOAMed. And then more recently, we've been doing podcasts for each one of these. And we've been partnering with the Curbsiders. They've been super helpful for this. And these have been remarkably effective. We ask participants to fill out their bracket, make their best guess of which ones will win. And inevitably the question comes, how do we keep score? How do we figure out who wins? And we initially had a system which we like to call Joel and Matt Decides. This was not very popular. We made a lot of controversial decisions. I will never forget having rituximab lose in the first round and the hate mail that I gleaned from that. So then we decided we would do a majority wins system, and this resulted in what we found is the more popular topic always beat out the less popular one, or not, maybe popular is the wrong word, but well-known. And so, for example, we had balanced solutions versus normal saline. This was a few years ago before a lot of the data had accumulated, and normal saline trounced in majority wins. And we think, this turns out not to have been right. And we wanted to create a system where that was no longer the case. And so what we came up with is a panel of experts, what we call our blue ribbon panel. Oh, this slide. Do I have the right slide? No, I'm sorry. I have the wrong slide here. I apologize. This is the old blue ribbon panel. I did create a slide for the new blue ribbon panel. I just don't know where it is. I apologize. And they vote. There's 9 members of the panel, and they vote. And so here you can see opiates just trouncing NSAIDs, not surprising, in a kidney round. And that's the one who wins. It's interesting. The crowd was more equally balanced at 50-50. But one of the more interesting ones was we had a dialysis region where we pitted a KT over V, urea versus depression and dialysis as an outcome that should be measured. And it was a very close guess in the blue ribbon panel, but the crowd was decidedly focused on depression, thinking that's a much more important outcome. And when it splits, you can have these situations where people start to get mad, and a hashtag began trending called the blue ribbon fail. And this one is actually for a different topic. This was a blood pressure one, but it was initially it was funny, and then it became a little bit more uncomfortable, and then a little bit more uncomfortable as more people started piling on. And the blue ribbon panel got a little nervous about this. We said, well, what you need to do is you need to, why don't you guys write a blog post explaining your decision? And we did get them to write the blog post. A number of them said they would only participate if they could be anonymous. They were a little bit worried about this. And it was, to me, what I loved about it is we never anticipated this happening. This is something that we started the process, and this just emerged from the audience. And again, you get this situation where kind of a blog post results in Twitter posts, which then results in another blog post, and you get this thought and conversation reinforcing each other. We then created Neph Madness in a Box, and this is just a way for you to do Neph Madness in your fellowship program, which sounds like your department does, which we think is really positive. It's been super fun to see this, do this, and people have really taken this to extremes, and we've seen people go to parties, and we've had this all over the world. The people in Poland went really crazy, had a big party. In fact, it got covered in the local newspaper. And then, so it's been a lot of fun. This is our executive team, being as serious as we typically are. We have Anna Bergner from Vanderbilt, myself, Samira Farouk from Mount Sinai, Tim Yao from WashU, and Matt Sparks from Duke. And then we just added, this year, Pascal Karula is joining our team. We've had a lot of people help over the years. This is an incomplete list, but it's been really rewarding to see this happen. And we've had, up until our pandemic year, we've had nice growth every year with Neph Madness. Hopefully this year we'll be able to continue that stretch. And we've also seen an increasing number of people from outside the United States participate, which is very exciting. And page views at AJKD blog. They don't they don't let me put a number on the y-axis, but I can show the relative increase, and it is by far the most popular month that they have on their site. So then I want to talk about NephJC, which is the Nephrology Journal Club. This is something that we're seeing all over medicine, that people are using the Nephrology Journal Club. This kind of typically the model is that a group of people will decide on a study. They will then announce it through various channels, and then they will have a chat, and then they will repeat that at various intervals. NephJC has gone kind of bonkers on this model. We have the chat like everybody else, but we also publish a summary on the website. We create a visual abstract. We do a tutorial on it. We do a wrap-up post on some months, and we also have a podcast. And the idea here is kind of, it's like a stop at Chipotle. Like, you can choose how you want to participate. You can take what you want. Do you want guacamole with it? Do you want to do the tutorial? Do you want to do the chat? And one of the other nice things about this is the chat really is a live experience. Like, you really need to be there to get the information and to get the participation. It's hard to get recognize that if you're not there, but everything else really does stand, and you really can get the information if you're not there live. You can listen to the podcast later on and get the information. And so we think this is a great experience. We do the chat 3 times for each one for different time zones. And we've had nice steady growth, and we get up to about, hold on, my dog. and we've gotten great growth, and it does feel like about 200 participants is kind of the max. We've had some chats like Credence, for example, and DAPA CKD, where we get 600 participants, and the chats kind of get unwieldy at that measure. I think 200 is really a good number, and that's kind of where we've settled at. But again, we've pushed this idea as much as we can. We realized that we needed real good statistical understanding to be able to do this. So we don't have a statistical editor, but we have started writing blog posts where we explain different ways to create methods, and it's been pretty rewarding. We created a code of conduct, and this has been helpful for keeping a large community as we have, working together and being polite. And it's been fun. We've been seeing ourselves kind of show up in measures of what fellows use to do teaching. We were down here at the bottom. We expect to be moving up in the future when this study is being redone. It's also interesting to see other foam med contributions also being part of how fellows are learning. And then we are the largest and oldest active Twitter journal club. People look to us as leaders, and so we created a primer so you can build your own Twitter journal club. We created this, and it has a bunch of different chapters to it, kind of talking through all the different steps. And then the pandemic hit. And so this was an editorial that was in the BMJ on February 28th. And it just kind of talked about, how we're going to prevent this pandemic, unfortunately not very successfully. And this was a rapid response published in the BMJ just a few days later. And then an editorial, a correspondence in the Lancet about a week after that. And both of those responses suggested a link between severe COVID infection and ACEs and ARBs. And the thought went with this. We knew that there was a high case fatality rate. Important risk factors included hypertension, cardiac disease, and diabetes. And all those were indicators of RAS, for RAS blockade. And that at least in animal, then SARS-CoV used ACE2 for entry. And that in animal studies showed that ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers can increase at least the mRNA expression of those ACE2s, at least in the heart again. And the thought was, well, if this was also happening in the lungs, this could be causing problems. And it resulted in people getting way ahead of the science. And the importance here, as you guys know, ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers are among the most prescribed medications in the United States, if not the world. And telling people that this could make them more sick is quite an irresponsible way to go beyond the data. And importantly, even though these were published in peer-reviewed journals, they were correspondence and rapid responses. These things don't go through careful peer review before they're published. And so they carry the weight of a peer-reviewed journal with maybe not that's beyond what they deserve. And Matt and Swapnil saw this and were very concerned about this, and they had some expertise in hypertension and the ACE basic science. And so what they did is they start reviewing all these papers and summarizing them and posting them to the NEFJC website. And then they quickly realized that as the paper started pouring in, they needed a little bit more manpower, and they assembled a really outstanding team of hypertension and RAS researchers and epidemiologists to help with this project. And they were incredibly productive, especially early in the pandemic before we had a real sense of this. These are just the updates to the pages that they were creating. They were really doing 1 or 2 updates a day, almost nearly every day, building out this summary of the data. And part of their summary was they went through and they found all of the professional societies and their recommendations on what to do with ACE inhibitors, in addition to putting out their own recommendations, which was really stand pat. We don't think there's good enough data to make a recommendation here. And this was a model that we really liked. And so we recreated this for both acute kidney injury, dialysis and CKD, pediatrics and transplant, putting together a team, reviewing the literature, putting updates on the website. And it resulted in just a phenomenal explosion in traffic to our website. So we normally, NFJC gets between 20 and 30,000 page views a month. And in March alone, we had 320,000 page views, just a year's worth of traffic in 1 month. And then these experts started getting invited to do reviews, and they started writing letters, and they resulted in incredible, bountiful publications for the participants there. And kind of just a summary of what this is we created a learning and discussion platform. And what this resulted in is a lot of casual network of scientists. So that when the crisis came, we were quickly able to organize that loose network into a much more formal network to quickly inform the community of what kind of best practices there were. And it's pretty fun. NFJC now has a bunch of references in the literature. This is something we had not seen before. It's really kind of fun to see that happen. But I think in addition to being fun, this is a super useful way to rapidly respond. And I think we saw this a lot in the pandemic as people created new channels in which to respond to these issues. So kind of, we have these two projects or assemblages. We have this Neph Madness and NFJC, and it's interesting to see how they differ. So Neph Madness came first, and in some ways is bigger in terms of its one-time thing, but it's a lot more complex, right? You're trying to explain to people it's a basketball tournament of nephrology concepts, you just get these blank stares and back. But when you tell people it's a journal club, but on Twitter, people immediately understand. And then Neph Madness is just a lot, right? It's 32 nephrology concepts that we drop on people all at once. NFJC, much simpler. It's one article, one summary, and a visual abstract, and it happens just twice a month. And then, trying to understand, well, what do you use Twitter for? And Neph Madness, you really just to trash talk your friends. While at NFJC, we use it to actually discuss the article with authors and docs. And then, what's the point of Neph Madness? You want to pick the concepts that match the picks of the blue ribbon panel. While NFJC just does this article help you take care of your patients. And lastly, Neph Madness comes once a year and has a hard deadline to submit your picks. Well, NFJC, it's twice a month. Are you too busy for it this month? Don't worry, just wait a couple of weeks and you'll get another one. And all this has let us realize that NFJC ends up being a much better model for onboarding people to the social media train. It's been really exciting to see this happen. And I have more, but this is not a bad stopping point. I'm kind of figuring that I'm over my time already. I'd be happy to stop here and take questions. I just want to get a sense of where you guys are.
Thank you so much, Joel, for a wonderful talk. And I agree we can kind of stop here just for a moment. I think some people have clinical responsibilities to get to, and I think we may see some people drop off. But I do want to leave this open for a question and answer period for Dr. Topf just while we have him here. So folks that need to go, please feel free. So you're welcome to enter questions in the chat or as well as use the raise your hand function, and I can kind of help moderate. It looks like Raj was the first one to jump in there. So go ahead, Raj.
Thanks, Joel. Fascinating talk. I forgot to say that there's one nephrologist that Barack Obama follows, and that's Joel Topf. Just something that's an interesting and important piece of trivia. Well, it is fascinating. It's of course we're all learning how to engage with this new medium. Medicine, academic medicine particularly, is very hierarchical, and people that are in positions of power are the ones least likely to engage or be facile in this new media. One of the things that we are struggling with as a specialty is in making our specialty more attractive to young trainees, given the interest in nephrology is low. How do we compare to other specialties, and is there an opportunity there?
Yeah, so the leader of the pack here is by far emergency medicine. I think it's interesting to think about why that may be, but I think they have way ahead of this. They started early. They have a whole ecosystem of podcasts and really sophisticated blogs, and have done a great job of really fleshing this out. And a lot of what we are doing is we're just kind of following in their footsteps. boy, outside, and then in internal medicine, there are good cohorts of people. So the rheumatologists, they also have a journal club, but it meets sporadically. They have a couple of podcasts, but those again are not regular podcasts. General internal medicine is getting better and better. Again, they're starting to build up a cohort of podcasts, and there's good blogs there. Pediatrics has really pushed forward in terms of politically moving, supporting different political positions, as you would expect with pediatrics. But it's interesting, like in pediatrics, since they're so tightly associated with vaccines, and there's a very prominent anti-vaccine movement that's very prominent on social media, it can chase pediatricians away because they do face a lot of pushback. Infectious disease have the same thing with chronic Lyme disease, being a very active community on social media and is very hostile to infectious disease. And I think it's really inhibited that. I don't think there's any internal medicine specialty that's ahead of nephrology and where we've been, and we're really proud of that. And I think you look at the results that we saw this year in on the match, with 20% increase in number of participants and people, 20% increase in the number of people that matched. I hope that this is going to be a trend, and we're going to see this continue to increase, because I think that the strategy that we're taking and showing how nephrology really is relevant to internal medicine and is something that is interesting, and we're catching people that are younger in their or earlier in their their educational maturity, I think is essential. Right. I mean, you see that in the studies that have looked at this, is that by the time people are second-year residents, they've made up their mind. They already have made the decision whether to go nephrology up or down. And so we need to be pushing earlier into that third year, into that second year. And places to do that, like the Curbsiders and on Twitter, is a great way to do that. You're not going to get those people on ASN communities.
All right, so Ian has a question here. You touched on this a bit, but how do we ensure quality in the Twitter sphere? You were open-minded and found Osm was 252, but to get political, the last 4 years have shown that if you're wrong, you can convince people it's 278.
Yeah. That is right. So this is a big issue, and my position is that medicine has dealt with this in a lot of circumstances. That this is the reason that we have peer review. We've seen many examples recently that peer review is not perfect. What we want to do is we want to model good behavior in this regard, right? So this is why I bring that example up, right? People look to me as a leader in this field, so I want to show you, hey, this is when I was wrong, and this is how I behave when I'm wrong. And in fact, I highlighted in my lectures when I go around the country that I was wrong, and it's okay. Right? We all make mistakes, and we need to. This is how you handle these mistakes, and one of the other things that I've seen, and I think is pretty interesting or impressive, is how rare those mistakes are, and that people do own up to it. And I think that Twitter is more reliable than you would expect, and I think that. People that do make mistakes and are unreliable sources of information, unlike in politics, they don't get promoted and they are not popular on Twitter. I really think that in med Twitter, specifically Neph Twitter, if you're somebody who is unreliable and says things that are wrong, you will get unfollowed, or people will not promote your material. And so far, it seems to be kind of self-correcting. But it's a continuous problem, and it's not one that I would say is a solved problem. One of the things that I didn't talk about in this lecture, but one of my things that I love tracking is when I get an interesting disease, I always look it up on Wikipedia to see how accurate Wikipedia is. And Wikipedia has two types of errors. Most of the errors in Wikipedia is it's not even covered. Right? It's a very brief description of the disease that doesn't have a lot of depth. But it's amazing how rare you'll actually find a factual error in Wikipedia. It's incredibly accurate, and that's a volunteer effort. And so I think it's possible, but it's definitely a challenge.
So we'll go to Nisha here, who asks, given the influence of social media, how do you think this will be used for academic recognition and promotion in the future?
Yeah, so this is So right now, not very much is the answer. The leader in this area is the Mayo Clinic, and they have very specific guidelines on how they value different social media participation. And specific enough that if you say you have a blog, they will say, well, what's your traffic? And they will score how important that blog is based on your traffic. Same thing with podcasts, and same thing with social media presence. And so they've put a marker down, and it's nice to see some other places starting to recognize that. But to me, the most important thing is through social media, I've developed a tremendous number of collaborations, and those collaborations result in kind of traditional publications. That is how I've been able to produce chapters and lectures like these and things that are traditionally measured on a CV for promotion, rather than, oh, I've had a blog for 12 years and I get this much traffic, which I think is going to be hit or miss for promotion and tenure committees, whether they recognize that. But all P&T committees are going to recognize, oh, I gave a lecture in Poland, or I went to Ireland to give this lecture, or I have this publication in this journal of this impact factor because of, and all that becomes, is due to the work that I've done on social media. And so, in the end, I think it's, tracking people's academic production and how valuable it is always fraught with problems. And I think this area is no different, and always kind of the nature of new developments is they're going to be, the last thing that's going to get recognized is going to be in terms of promotion and tenure, which tends to be very conservative. But it's going to vary from institution to institution, and you're seeing some that are more progressive than others.
Christine?
Hi, Joel. Thank you for the great talk. For some context, I have some questions about trainees, and for some context, I'm a research fellow. And so my question is, how do you think that this new open access to information through the internet is changing the way that that expectations about what students need to learn in medical school is changing? And what I mean by that is, I think, are we going more from this model of you need to memorize all these things versus you need to know what to be able to look up, because you're always going to be able to look things up now? And my kind of second part to that is, how do you ensure that trainees are not penalized for using social media, for asking a stupid question that could potentially be Googled because their name is attached to it, or raising a controversial opinion and having that used against them in interviews and all that?
Yeah, those are great questions. So, I mean, I think, I'm naturally an optimist, and I see the transition to a pass-fail USMLE Part 1 is part of this recognition that we need to stop forcing our medical students to spend all their time memorizing UWorld questions. I mean, the medical students that I'm seeing in third year are incredibly bright. They know tremendous numbers of facts, and I think we have tortured them to get them there, and I feel it's bad for their mental health. So I think we're starting to see the institution of medical education moving in the right direction. Long time coming. We do live in this world with instant access to facts, and we need to have people that are able to critically evaluate whether that's a good source or not. The other issue is, how do you avoid people getting punished for how they search up information? I mean, I've had a lot of medical students tell me that they get harassed or punished or told specifically not to use UpToDate when they're putting together a presentation. Usually the argument against UpToDate is it's too easy, right? Literally, they want that the attending who's asking them not to use UpToDate wants to punish them and make them work harder. And that doesn't seem like a productive use of anybody's time. Right. I mean, UpToDate has, in my opinion, some of the areas that I'm familiar with usually has the best authors on a topic. They literally get experts in the field to provide the answers, and that's going to be better than a lot of what people are going to find when they take their own crack at doing a lit search. And then again. What happens how does social media follow you? And this is a big problem, right? There was a I believe she was Arab, she may have been Palestinian, medical student who got accepted to the Cleveland Clinic internal medicine residency program. And I think 8 years earlier, she had tweeted something, profoundly anti-Semitic, and somebody found that tweet and published it, and she got fired. Right. And honestly, I don't think we should punish 24-year-olds for what they put on Twitter when they were 16. Right. I would expect the people to have matured over that time. And I don't think, who I was at 16 represented who I was when I started my residency. But that's the world we live in right now. And, this is one of the things that people need to be conscious of. I don't think it happens very often, but there is danger to taking extreme positions on a public platform like this. And I do think you are seeing young people moving away. Like my kids are 18 years old. They hate Twitter. They don't do it at all. That they much prefer to live on closed social media platforms where, WhatsApp, et cetera, where they're communicating just with their friends and nobody can see what they're talking about. And so, I think what we're also hopefully moving towards is a more enlightened position where people recognize that people had bad ideas in the past, and that doesn't necessarily characterize them for the rest of their lives. And we're going to be more accepting of people doing things that may have been considered unacceptable on social media years in the past, and not going to hold it against them. But I think that kind of change is going to be slow. Right. We live in a world where when we see what you said, that characterizes you. And I think eventually we'll move past that as everybody has once everybody has an embarrassing thing on Twitter, then it'll become less important. Or once the decision makers have an embarrassing thing on Twitter. But right now the decision makers don't have anything like that. And I think some of it's already changed, right? I mean, even just a few years ago, you heard a lot about don't have a glass of alcohol on any pictures on Facebook. And I think some of that has gone away. Not entirely. There was just earlier this year, there was this bikini in medicine hashtag that went around where I think it was a vascular surgery journal. People tried to assess professionalism among vascular surgeons. And they had a very antiquated view of professionalism that was full of a lot of bias and sexism. They got an incredible amount of pushback. The article was pulled. The authors were humiliated and retracted everything they said about it. And I think that is how you move the pile forward. I hope that
Yeah, so maybe the second to last question here, because I'm going to take the last one for myself. But Stuart says, I love when people post the link to journal articles on Twitter, as we don't have access to all journals at our university. Is this an increasing trend to share published work? Do you support this?
Oh, absolutely. Not only to support links to journals, I support, what it was, now I'm thinking the website's name escapes me, SciMed, is that what it's called, SciMed? Yeah, Sci-Hub, which allows people to get through these paywalls to allow people to get to the source material. I mean, I think if we are going to want to live in an evidence-based world, we can't hide this evidence behind paywalls. And so, yeah, I mean, links to the primary literature is exactly what we need. This is how we get to a more enlightened discussion, and we're not just, and the reality is, if you look, if you put a question into Google, which is usually where I start, I don't start on PubMed. I usually put a question right into the Google question bar, and they will absolutely prioritize things that are in the PubMed Open, right? So open articles get way more traction than articles behind a paywall. And so, I think that is the direction we're headed.
So last question that I wanted to ask is maybe to just have you reassure me about social media, because I recently watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix and I was alarmed. And I'm curious how you reconcile the use of social media with, some may even describe the business models of these companies like Facebook and Twitter as bad, very bad. And, concerns about addiction. And, the question in this movie was, do you check your phone before you pee in the morning when you wake up, or while you're peeing? Because those are the only two options, right? And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that, and how we can sort of not cause medical students to be walking around bumping into walls looking at their phones.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, there's no doubt these are profoundly addictive, and I kind of feel that that's not a genie that I can put back in the bottle, right? And so what I'm trying to say is, if these things are going to be addictive, let's allow some of the material that's out there to be more healthy, and let's try to put better stuff out there. I don't think we've seen the worst of it yet. I don't think I know that pharma is watching what we tweet, right? I had an opportunity to go to DaVita and see their social media operation, and they are tracking all nephrologists, and they know what all of us are saying on social media. And I don't think we've seen how that's going to get feedback to us, but we're starting to see pharma money rush into Neph Twitter. I'm sure it clearly is already there for HEMONC, which actually has a pretty good social media, a bunch of docs there, and they've had a lot of money there already, but we're starting to see it come in with nephrology. I know it's coming in because they've pitched me to lead it. I've not chosen to do it yet, in terms of specifically creating content that is funded by pharma companies for Neph Twitter. And I'm sure the fact that I turned them down, they're only going to be able to collect that money if they actually produce the content. So someone's going to say yes, and it's going to be here, and it'll be interesting to see how it's executed. And so, like I said, I think it's going to, there are going to be aspects of this that are going to get worse. And I have no idea what form it's going to take. And I think, like I said, my kids have moved to private social media networks, and I know that Kinar Jarari did an article, I think it might have been in CJSON, talking about using WhatsApp to do medical education in their fellowship program. And I think that is right. That's one of the solutions from that is, let's get away from these open social networks where people are going to be watching everything we do, and move education to a hidden area. And additionally, that may also be a safer place for people to ask questions that maybe people consider are stupid. But what you bring up is a big challenge, and it's going to be a big problem. And this is going to sound lame, but part of me says, you know what? This is not a genie I can put in my bottle. This is not my responsibility. I recognize it to be a problem, but I don't have a solution.
Well, thank you so much, Joel. I mean, a really inspiring talk, and amazing what you've done, and really you're obviously the thought leader in nephrology in this area. So thank you for sharing your time with us, and for going over time. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I get one more? The last thing is that we are now, we run an internship, a social media internship. Raj mentioned this briefly at the beginning. We are now accepting applications. So if this area intrigues you, if you want a career in medical education, you're going to need this as part of your portfolio. You need to have at least knowledge of how to do this. And then it's a year-long fellowship. We're going to teach you tutorials, visual abstracts, running the NephJC, and have a new section this year where we'll be teaching people how to create, edit podcasts. And so go to nephjc.com, put in your application. We'd love to have you.